And welcome back. We are going to get ready to go ahead and add in our user input. And we, of course, have last time worked with the serializable field, and we could start seeing how some of those different things when we manipulate values can work. But what's if we actually wanted to get, instead of having to work inside Unity, to actually just press a key? Well, in order for us to do that, we need to use Unity's input systems. And with the input system, we really kind of need to think about this as a logical process to convert player actions such as key presses, mouse clicks, etc. into information for the game. Now, Unity has two systems that currently handle input. So there's the kind of the newer input system, which is much more extensible, customizable, and then we have the older input manager, which is what we're actually going to look at and use for this project. So if we go over here in Unity and we want to actually start using this system, if we come up here into our menu here, we of course have our different settings that we can kind of start getting into. So under the edit menu here, if we go to project settings, give Unity a second here, we of course will have our little window that pops up here. This is a little small, so I'm just going to stretch this out here so I can see this a little nicer. And we go to the input manager here. We can of course see this is where we will have control, and this is using UnityEngine.input. So this is the set of scripts you can think about that are going to really kind of control things. And you can see it says, hey, we want to use physical keys, which is correct because we don't want to use a virtual keyboard. And if we open up the axis real quick here, one thing I want to point out is we have this horizontal and vertical. And under horizontal, you can see it's named horizontal. We want to keep that in mind because it's going to use this exact naming system here. All right, and we of course can see then what are the buttons that we're going to use. Well, this corresponds to left and right, A and D. So this is a good way to think about when we're moving horizontally, we're moving left to right, and these are going to be kind of ranging from values of like -1 to 1. And similarly, if we look at our vertical, we can see we have something very similar here. Our axis is called vertical. Again, we're going to want to keep in mind this exact name here with the capital. And then we have up and down here. Similarly, we have W and S. So one way to think about this is of course corresponding to our left and right, up and down arrow keys, or if you're more familiar with WASD, that is what these are corresponding to here. All right, that is of course a quick overview of how those are going to end up working. We do have a couple other things in here that you could look at, such as there's another horizontal, vertical. We're not going to worry about these right now because this right here is for more if you had like a joystick. We do have mouse control in here as well, but we're going to hold off on using mouse for now, and we're just going to worry about simply just using keyboard. All right, now input manager is not anything we have to import or anything like that. It's simply just part of the project settings. So we can actually go ahead and close this and head over to our code to go ahead and get ready to actually write some script. So what I want to do is I want to actually go into my update method here, and I'm just going to go ahead and add a new line here, and I'm going to create a variable that's local to this method. And the reason why I want to do that and not put it up here like I did with the other ones is because if I put it up here, it's going to pretty much exist once, and I would have to have some kind of thing that calls back to update it. Whereas if I create the variable here, we're creating pretty much a fresh copy of it every time this update is being called. So because these are floats, let's go ahead and create a new float here. And we want to, of course, name this appropriately. So let's go ahead and give this a appropriate value. So we have, of course, had before like turn speed down here that we could use. Maybe we call this something like turn amount. So that way it's saying this is the amount that we want to turn. Now notice it's saying, hey, you want to set this turn speed? Well, yeah, we could do that, but we actually want to instead use the input here, right? Because we want this input to be driven by the value from the keyboard. Now input, of course, is a piece of the Unity engine, and we're actually going to invoke a piece of that by pressing the dot, and you can see we get a couple different methods that come up here that we can use. The one we're going to want is GetAxis. All right, because again, remember if we looked at that input manager, that was under the axis command, and so right here is GetAxis, and we're just going to use parentheses here, and all we're going to do is go ahead and say, hey, we want this to be horizontal. All right, and the reason why I put horizontal in here, if you remember, that was the name that was in our input manager, and remember I said it's going to matter what it is. So in there is a horizontal with a capital H, so I need to make sure that this matches exactly, including these quotations, because this is considered a string or a string reference, and so if I don't include those quotations, we're going to get an error here. So we got to make sure we put horizontal spelled correctly and in quotations. Add a semicolon here to close that line out. And what I want to do is in my rotate here, I just want to see how this is going to change. Instead of using turn speed for a minute here, let's go ahead and change this into turn amount. and save this, and then let's pop back on over to Unity just to see how that has changed things. All right, so let's go ahead and press play and give Unity a second here to rebuild. And one of the things you'll notice is that now when I press my arrow keys, I of course have some control. All right, it might act a little wonky. For example, I'm pressing the left key here and it's turning to the right, and right is turning left. So I do have a little bit backwards movement here, but we do have control now. Awesome. Now back in our code for a second here, we want to fix that because remember we said we're turning the wrong direction here. So all I'm going to do is here in my turn amount, I'm just going to add a negative sign in front of that. And all that's going to tell Unity is, hey, do the opposite. So if it was going to the left before, it's now going to make it turn to the right because we're just inverting those values. Remember how I said it kind of goes from -1 to 1, and so that is just simply flipping that around. Now, we did lose a little bit of functionality. Remember before I said we were going to kind of temporarily take out our turn speed because that is what used to exist here. And so we want to be able to bring that back in so we can control how fast we're turning. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to come right on up here to our first float turn around. And right after this input.getAxis, I'm just going to go ahead and multiply in the turn speed. And all that's going to do is allow this value to multiply this. So if we want to make it a lot larger, we'll be able to do that, or like a lot smaller. It's just going to get whatever is set here in that serialized field so that way we can control that. All right, so we're back in Unity, and let's go ahead and press run here to go ahead and see this now. And just like before, I have my controls, but you notice now it is driving the correct direction. And because we added that serializable field in here, now if I were to go ahead and, for example, say, hey, you know what, I want to control this value a little bit, I can, of course, kind of slow down that turn speed, or I could speed it up so I have different values to it. So I have that control now. So for example, if I just go ahead and change this to, let's say, 0.5, and let's go ahead and rerun this here. One of the things you'll notice is that now when I go to try to turn, it's not turning as quickly because I set it to half of that speed. All right, so that's pretty cool. But what about our other movements? So right now you notice we just have turn control. What about if we wanted to control our forward and back movement? So here we are in a code, and we of course saw how we controlled this here with our turning values, and we can use the horizontal axis. But I want you to go ahead and challenge yourself. How can you go ahead and set this up so that way you could do this with the vertical axis? I want you to go ahead and pause the video, give yourself a second to go ahead and think about how you can do that, and then let's go ahead and solve that together. All right, so let's go ahead and add this in. The first thing we want to do is create another float here. So we're going to create a float, and let's call this one the move amount. Since our variable was move speed, we're going to call this move amount. And we're going to do, again, same things we did before. We're going to use the input class, and we're going to use GetAxis. And this time, instead of using horizontal, we're going to use vertical because, again, we're using that vertical axis. And I want to multiply this. All right, notice it's suggesting plus turn amount. Well, that's not what we want. We want to multiply this by the move speed. There we go. Look, it's giving me the correct thing. So I'll tab that over to accept it. And what I want to do is I want to change this variable move speed to move amount because, again, I want this to be controlled by this float here. All right, that looks pretty good. We'll save that and let's pop back over to Unity. All right, and so if we go ahead and run our game and give it a second to reload, we should, of course, now have control over this. And you can see right now it's not moving because I haven't actually pressed my keys. Oh, look, I'm pressing the up and down key. That looks to be moving in the right direction. Up is up, down is down. We, of course, can control left or right. So we have control over this capsule now, which effectively is going to end up becoming our car. But we have that ability now. This is pretty awesome what we can do.